Well, hey, what is up, Mission? Hey, if we've never met before, my name is Taylor Hunt, and I get to work with our middle school and high school students here at Mission and get to be part of our teaching team as well. And whether you are here in the room, out in the lobby, on the patio, or tuning in online, it is just good to be together this weekend. And what a weekend, am I right? I mean, come on, Dodgers, that's what I'm talking about. You know, I almost just brought a broom up here to start just because I feel something coming on, but I didn't want to jinx it or anything like that. And if you don't know what we're talking about, are you living under a rock? Like, come on, it's time to get in. But hey, today we are continuing in a series that we've been in called All Skate, where we are looking at some different values that we have here at Mission, that for those of us that are followers of Jesus, these are some things that for all of us, that we all get to participate in. And so we talked about in the first week how we believe in practical help, intangible hope. We talked last week about life-changing ministry and how we get to be a part of that. Next week, we're going to take a look at kingdom impact and how we get to live lives that have so much more meaning than just being about us. And today, we're going to talk about the value of what it looks like to throw great parties. And unfortunately, church people tend to be thought of less like party people and more like Angela from The Office. You know, people that shut parties down. Or some people tend to think of church people like Homer Simpson's neighbor, his high diddly ho neighborino, you know, Ned Flanders, who one time said that he went to Bible camp to learn how to be more judgmental. And any SNL fans in the room? If you guys remember Dana Carvey's most famous character on SNL, the church lady. You know, this lady that was marked by being condescending and patronizing and, well, isn't that just special? Like, this is right or wrong, the picture, deserved or undeserved, that people tend to have in their mind when they think about church people. And people tend to think that we are more known for our judgment than for our joy. A study found that 84% of young non-Christians said that they know a Christian personally, but only 15% would say that the lifestyles of those believers were noticeably different in a good way. A similar study found that the top 3 words that non-Christians and people of other religions would use to describe Christians were hypocritical, judgmental, and self-righteous. And over 50% of the people interviewed all marked those as their top 3 words. But at the same time, Christians in that same interview, that survey, they picked 3 words to describe themselves. And the words that Christians used to describe the way they see themselves were words like giving, compassionate, loving. And right or wrong, there is a pretty big difference between the way church people tend to see themselves and the way that the world experiences us. And I have a friend named Dave, and he is a pastor in Kentucky. And he was surprised whenever he got a strongly worded email from his son's high school English teacher. And she said that his son, Sam, had turned in a personal essay with what she thought was a very concerning title. The title of his essay was "The Night I Spent with 20 Strippers." And Dave, whenever he read this, he just sat back and laughed because Dave and his family every year throw a dinner for 20 to 30 women who are trying to get out of the adult entertainment industry. And this is like a black tie dinner. It is a fancy meal. They cater in steak and lobster. Dave's son, Sam, he would get some of his friends together, and they would be the waiters this night at the meal. They would get to know these women, learn their names and their stories, give them a gift, and then every night at the end of the dinner, Dave would just share a simple message with these women, that they were never too far for God. And over the years, they started to become friends with different women, and they would actually help them as they were transitioning from the industry and to find housing and jobs. And one year, these women loaded up on a bus, and they were getting ready to head over to Dave's house. And on their way there, some of the women were going for the very first time. And this woman that was invited to the party for the first time, she found out on the way that Dave was a pastor, and she began to freak out. She began to get frightened and said, pull the bus over. I have to get off. I can't go there. I cannot be around that man. And some of the women who had been to the party before were like, you're going to love him. Dave and Beth, they are the best. Like, you have to come with us. This is the best night of the year. Just come with us, please. And then this woman began to tell her friends about how the last time she had been around a group of Christians was a few years before, as this group of Christians was picketing out in front of her club. And they were saying things like dirty, filthy, disgusting. And there in the middle of this crowd of church people stood the pastor. And he pointed at this woman and each of her friends, and he said, whore, whore, whore. And on that day, she encountered hate and judgment at the hands of church people. And why is it that so many people have stories just like this one? Why is it that hypocrisy, judgment, hatred, racism have marked so many Bible-thumping, Jesus-following church people? See, now more than ever, what the church needs is a separation of church and hate. Like what the world needs and what the world is waiting for is more people like Dave, more party throwers who instead of judging and condemning and demeaning, they host a party, invite people in, provide a place and a space of love and joy in a way that stands out to a watching world because it is the way of Jesus. In fact, in Jesus' most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is teaching to thousands of people on this mountainside in northern Israel called the Mount of Beatitudes, also known as Mount Eremos. And this mountainside overlooks the Sea of Galilee and the fields and farmlands of Gennesaret. And imagine that you are sitting on this hillside. The breeze is blowing through the crowd of fishers and farmers, of women and children. You can hear goats and sheep bleating in the background. There's probably a slight stench from this crowd of people all packed in together with the sun beating down on their face. Like deodorant hasn't been invented yet, so this crowd of men and women, they smell like the backside of a donkey or like a pack of 6th grade boys because same, am I right? And a hush falls over the crowd as this man slowly makes his way to the front. It's this guy that they have heard about. They have heard rumors of this man, whispers throughout their city, throughout the countryside, that this is the guy they've been waiting for. That this is the guy who makes lame people walk, who makes blind people see, that this is the guy who came to set them free. And suddenly he began to teach. And he taught like no one they had ever heard before. And this teaching, it was full of mic drop moments. There were times where he said things that made people literally had to pick themselves up off the floor. And at the end of this sermon, he says this. He says, do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. And have you ever judged someone? Have you ever sized people up, made a snap decision about somebody in a moment, and then written them off completely? Have you ever looked critically at someone, made an entire ranking system where you're always at the top, prettier, smarter, funnier, worth more than other people? You ever write somebody off as an idiot or ignorant because they have the audacity to disagree with you? I know, how could they do that? They think differently than you. They see a problem differently than you. Or they see a solution differently than you. I mean, there are even some people, can you believe it, that they have like the chutzpah to vote differently than you, to be a part of different groups than you. I mean, have you ever put those kind of people down to make yourself feel better? You ever made fun of someone, excluded someone, belittled someone, just to make yourself at the top? Because I have. And it's like Jesus knew that it would be so easy for people like me, for people like you, for people like us to be marked by judgment. And he goes on to say, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all of the time there is a plank in your own eye? See, Jesus gives us this hilarious image that is from his real life. Any of you guys ever do any woodworking at home, or maybe you got some projects on where you do different stuff, or maybe you were in a high school like woodworking class or shop. Maybe you had a dad or a grandpa that used to help out, with different projects around the house. But Jesus, for the first 30 years of his life, he was a construction worker. He was a carpenter. And so he had a strong grip and calloused hands, and he would have been a master woodworker. And right here, he is saying to this crowd, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in someone else's eye when you've got a plank in your eye? Like, can you imagine if I was walking around and people being like, hey, buddy, you got something right there. Just let me see if I can get that. Like, you know what? Why don't you just walk up here closer? I'll just look this way. Let me get that out for you right there. No. You would say that I was being ridiculous. You would be like, that guy's a dummy. Like, somebody needs to help him out. You would think that I was absolutely crazy. And the truth is, I would be. I'm sorry, my dad jokes. With every kid, they've just gotten worse and worse. And see, Jesus, he actually ends this teaching by saying, you hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye. Then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. And a hypocrite in Jesus' day was this play actor, someone who wore a mask to look the part, but behind the mask, they were just hiding. And this right here is the first time in all of history that the term hypocrite is used in a negative context. And it's so interesting that Jesus in this moment connects judgment and hypocrisy. And remember the top two words that non-Christians use to describe Christians? Judgmental and hypocritical. Always looking at what's wrong in others instead of dropping the mask, dropping the plank, and looking at ourselves. And as followers of Jesus, our lives are meant to look more like him. We are called not to be people of the plank, but people of the party. You know, a Christian missionary named Stanley Jones one time interviewed Gandhi. And during the interview, Gandhi said, I like your Christ, but I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ. And that is not the way it should be. That is not who we want to be as a church. I mean, when Jesus showed up on the scene, the angel came pronouncing the first Christmas message, said, I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Good news, great joy for all people. See, as followers of Jesus, as church people, we have the greatest news in the history of the world, that God sent his one and only Son when we were at our worst. That when we had turned our back on God, that's when he ran towards us. That imperfect, broken, messy people like you and me, that when we have our messy lives, God doesn't look down on us and be like, somebody needs to clean that up, like not me. No, he leans in and he sent his Son into the mess for you and for me. And that is good, stinking news. And it should cause great joy because this news is for all people. And what I've been learning is that when I humbly and authentically follow after Jesus, when I am tempted to judge or look down or condemn or think I'm better than other people, when I'm tempted to lump people into stereotypes, that he actually leads me in a different direction, to look in here. And that's when the Holy Spirit, it produces this kind of fruit in our lives: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. There is no law against these things. And so can I just ask us today, because this isn't all skate. This is for all of us. Would people around you, would people around me, would they say that we're marked by judgment or marked by joy? Would they say that we are people of the plank or people of the party? And what I've been learning is that when I live with joy, Man, joy is contagious. I think one of the reasons so many people followed after Jesus was because he was just so joyful. Everywhere he went, people were inviting him to parties. The first miracle that we read about Jesus performing was turning water into wine. And he wasn't like, oops, I meant to make prune juice, but here you go. No, he turned a mediocre party into a great party. And all kinds of people wanted to be around him. Kids flocked to him because his joy, it was just so contagious. And have you ever met somebody that just has a contagious kind of joy? You know, I'll never forget whenever I met my friend Martin. He is a Kenyan pastor, and I met him in 2013 whenever I went on a mission trip. And Martin actually picked us up from the airport in Nairobi. And I immediately knew that I liked Martin because he was running around to all of the other tourists in the different groups, and he would run up to these people and he'd say, "Hi, I'm Martin Luther King Jr., and I have a dream." And then he would run away laughing. He'd run up to somebody else and he'd say, "Hi, I'm Barack Obama, and there is hope." And I was like, dude, I'm gonna be good friends with this guy, all right? And Martin and I, a couple days into our trip, we were out working with a remote people group called the Maasai people. And so this was like out in the African bush. And Martin and I needed to head out to a nearby village in order to help with one of the nightly church services that an organization would put on. And so we were looking around everywhere for our bus driver, and we just couldn't find him. And so we split up to go on a search party for this guy, and I made my way back defeated to the bus. And as I walked up towards the bus, Martin popped open the doors, stuck his head out, dangled the keys in front of his face, and he just smiled. And so I didn't think anything of it, and I just jumped right in the bus, and off we went. And man, let me tell you, we did like a tailspin, like coming right out of this parking lot. We were flying down this African road. A trip that earlier took us 10 minutes to complete took us 3 minutes. And on our way in, we hit every pothole like chunk, 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 chunk. But with Martin at the wheel, we were flying over those potholes, baby. Like we didn't feel nothing. I mean, I felt like I was on Fast and Furious mission trip edition. Like we were going so fast. And so sure enough, we finally make our way to that village. It's over on our left-hand side. Martin sees it. He hits the gas, then hits the brake, turns to the left. We do a fishtail drift right up to the front entrance of this village. And when the dust settled, I kid you not, there was a cow, an elephant, and a Maasai warrior standing there in the headlights, and their eyes were the size of dinner plates. I was like, what in the world are we doing? And so that night, we got to help lead this church service, and man, had such a good time getting to be there. Just one of the most incredible moments in my life, honestly. And then Martin and I, we get back up on the bus after that, and he takes back off, just going 60 miles an hour. And so I start to think to myself for the first time, I'm like, Martin, have you ever driven a bus before? And he just smiles, this big toothy grin that like pierced the African sky. And then I'm like, Martin, does the bus driver know that we took this bus? And he sat back and went, I have a dream. And there is hope. And we must take the gospel to these people. And I'm like, dude, anytime you can combine Grand Theft Auto with serving, like, I am in. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter where we went that whole week. If Martin was there, there was joy. Like if we were working and digging a well in the hot sun, Martin had a smile on his face, sweat on his back, and a joke to crack. Like if we were hanging out and helping with some of the schools for kids, Martin was the only adult playing in the dirt, playing soccer with these kids. Wherever we went, the joy quota just went up because Martin was there with his contagious kind of joy. And you ever notice how joy just seems to spread from person to person? Maybe you remember in COVID, this video that got millions of views of a little girl that lives in Portland and how every day she and her mailman, Ian, they would have this wild dance party and they would spread a little bit of joy. And they were interviewed on local news stations. They were even interviewed on Good Morning America, all because of this little dance routine thing that they had going on. Ian, the mailman, he actually received messages from people all over the world. People that worked in all different kinds of industries that were inspired by Ian's contagious, I mean, it's just too good. They were inspired by his contagious joy to bring a little party, to bring a little joy. wherever they went. And see, this joy that we have as followers of Jesus, it is so much different than the happiness that the world has to offer. See, happiness is external. It's dependent on what is going on out there, but joy is internal. It's an internal state of ease because we can trust that no matter what is happening, God is in control. Happiness is based on circumstance. The root word for happiness in Latin is actually luck. But joy is a condition of being a much-loved son or daughter of the Most High King. And happiness is by chance, but joy is a choice. And when we choose every day as followers of Jesus to live a life marked by joy, man, we will see that joy is transformational. And I don't know about you, but I think that we are all amazed by stories of transformation. You know, I heard this old preacher one time tell this kind of silly, goofy old story about an old hillbilly who took his wife and son to the big city for the very first time, where they saw so many new things. The hillbilly parked his car out in front of the hotel, took his son into the lobby where they saw two metal doors opening and closing, and bells would ring and lights would flash. And the son asked, "Pa, what is that?" And the father, who had never seen an elevator before, said, "Junior, I have no idea." And so they stood there and they watched as a little 95-year-old lady hobbled up, pushed the button, and when the doors opened, she got into the elevator, the doors shut, she stepped inside, the lights flashed, the bells dinged, and then a couple minutes later, whenever the doors opened again, a beautiful 25-year-old woman came walking out of the elevator. And the old hillbilly turned to his son and he said, "Junior, go get your mother." We are all amazed by transformation. You know, there's this little book titled Surprised by Joy, and it is written by this guy named C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis has written a number of books, like the Chronicles of Narnia and a ton of other fantastic books as well. But this book is like an autobiography of the first half of his life, where he describes his life from childhood to his conversion to Christianity in 1931. And up until that point, C.S. Lewis was a pretty adamant and hardened atheist. He used to belittle, battle, and berate and debate anybody who proclaimed to be a Christian. And do you know what he found that it was that made all the difference in his life in faith? It was the fact that he was surprised by joy. He said no matter how hard he tried, he could never find lasting joy throughout his life. That he could get what he called stabs of joy, but he finally realized that true joy is like a signpost to those lost in the woods, pointing the way to the one true God who is full of lasting joy. And the kind of joy that only Jesus can give, it has the power to transform you and me and the world around us. In Psalm 30, it says, "You have turned my mourning into joyful dancing. You have taken away my clothes of mourning, and you have clothed me with joy." And when we choose to live in joy, it will transform the world around us. It will transform the people who are waiting and looking and hoping for good news of great joy. And see, I've also been learning that joy, real joy, isn't actually about you. And it's not about me. Towards the end of my time in Kenya, we went and visited a slum in the capital city called Kibera. And it is the largest urban slum in Africa. It's about 4 miles outside of the capital city, and they guess that 500,000 to 1 million people live in Kibera. That's the most accurate guess they can get. And I will never forget walking down these slick alleys, unsure if I'm stepping in mud or something else. The smell was just pulverizing my nose. And it felt so eerie having the looming skyscrapers of a modern city looming over these poverty-lined streets. And you could just feel the devastation and oppression. And as we walked into this tiny mud shack with a tin roof on it, this little hut that a family called home, it was about 8 feet by 8 feet, and it was one room, and we were told that 6 to 8 people would live in a house like this. And I will never forget A couple days later, when I found out that this mud hut that we had walked into, that this was the home of my friend Martin. I have a dream Martin, who apparently used to have a pretty affluent job in a neighboring country, but he sold everything to move his family into the neighborhood because he knew that there was good news of great joy. And in his own words, he said that he stopped chasing happiness and started living a life that wasn't about him, and that's when he experienced real joy. You know, maybe you've heard someone say before that joy only comes when we live a life where it's Jesus, others, and then yourself. And you know, I might not be called to move to Africa, but I am invited to live in the freedom that comes, the joy that is to be found when I live life like it is not all about me. And when we throw parties here at Mission, they're actually so much better because they are not about us. We throw parties like Free Friday Flicks and the Christmas extravaganza for families in our community that might need a little hope. We throw the best party in all of Ventura County, Night to Remember for students with disabilities, because Jesus said, when you throw a party, invite the down and out, the under-celebrated, the overlooked, and don't make it about you. And when you do this, you will experience joy. And man, I cannot think of a more joyful night than Night to Remember and getting to celebrate our guests and their families. And we sat down and talked to one of our guests named LJ and his mom a couple of weeks ago to talk about Night to Remember. So why don't you check this out?
I'm LJ.
And I'm Melissa, and we've been coming to Night to Remember since 2012. Our first time at Mission, we walked in, and that was the day that they announced their very first Night to Remember. And I just thought, like, God has purposely placed our family here for this. With Night to Remember, a lot of things got going for us as far as how we were going to be able to feel comfortable placing LJ in the community. And to the rest of his story was epic. We always say it was like an ESPN story that we got to witness because of Night to Remember, and because I knew that there was a great community of neurotypical kids that were just ready to just pour into him. If you know LJ, like the boys on his football team called him Diamond Calves because he's always like jumping and dancing so much. And in like the neurotypical world, it's kind of looked as weird or unexpected. And in fact, when that starts to happen, that self-stimulating behavior starts to happen, we have to tell LJ, okay, to stop bouncing, or you have to make him stop. But on that night, he's just allowed to just let loose in a room, and everybody else, like even his hosts, are like bouncing like up and down next to him, and he's just able to be free and happy and not have to fit into like the box. With every right, you have that feeling of kind of like uneasiness, having a special needs child, and not necessarily handing them over, but basically just, like not being attached to them when there's been a lot of situations where you have been. Since 2012, they've been able to look at this thing in every single way possible to have it run in like such a good flow. For a special needs parent to really understand why NTR is so engaging. In special education, we have what's called the IEP, which is the Individual Education Plan. I always refer to Night to Remember as the IPP, which is the Individual Party Plan, which basically means any part that you don't feel comfortable in, you don't have to participate in. You don't feel comfortable going in the limo, you don't have to go in the limo. You don't feel comfortable wearing the tux, you don't have to wear the tux. Everything is tailored specifically to you, and whatever you feel comfortable with, it's a night to celebrate your child. It is really empowering to be in a room with other families and parents who just know that whole Me Too type of situation. Night to Remember has really done a lot for our family.
I can't wait for you to see Night to Remember. I see you there.
Man, I love that. IPP, Individual Party Plan, right? And it's easy when we think about Night to Remember to just think about the impact that this has on our guests. And we are all about the guests at Night to Remember. But it also makes a huge impact on these families. And so many of the families of students with disabilities, man, they feel like they are all alone. They feel like they have to fight so hard to get their kid whatever they need. They feel like sometimes they have to fight for scraps to make people to listen, to just get their kid to be treated normal and have a normal life and a normal experience. And I love that on this night, that is not the case. That we are all for the guests and their families. That when they show up, they are celebrated and in the spotlight and the limelight. That whenever all the hosts and guests have gotten paired, they've gone on the limo rides. Some of them have had their hair and their makeup done. That when they walk down that red carpet, get dragged down that red carpet, or sprint down that red carpet. Like they make their way into that dance hall. And when everybody is in there, man, it's like all of the judgments, all of the planks that we use to divide people, they all go away. And you see jocks and band kids. You see neurotypical and neurodivergent. People from all walks of life being together because it is like heaven and earth colliding, and it is a moment of true joy. And it has an impact on all of us. See, we have had volunteers that have had their worlds rocked by this joy. Our community has rallied around this joy. Our county even has rallied around this joy. We have had families that felt alone and isolated come to feel seen and known and loved and cared for. And it is like Jesus knew what he was doing when he said, you have good news of great joy and be a party kind of people. And so Mission, this party throwing is an all skate. Like this is for all of us. And right now we are trying to fund the initial part of NTR. So that means we have 3 or 4 days left to raise around $15,000, but you don't have to wait. You can do that today. You can do it on the app. You can make a donation by scanning the QR code, stopping by the booth in the lobby. And this is an all skate. We can all give some amount, $5, $10, $15, $20. Maybe we can sponsor 1 or 2 guests. But when we throw parties like this, when we celebrate the under-celebrated and we celebrate the overlooked, that's when we experience a blessing. That's when we get to be good news of great joy for all people. And that invitation is for all of us. Would you pray with me? God, we just thank you. God, we thank you that you are a God of incredible joy. That, God, it was for the joy set before you that you sent your son for us. That, God, when we were at our worst, when we had turned our back, when we had ran away, that you sent your one and only son for each one of us. And so, God, would you just help that truth to change the way we live? God, would you help us to be people over the coming weeks and months, to be people that are not marked by judgment, but are marked by joy? God, would you help us to live with this infectious, contagious joy so that the people around us, our family, our friends, our neighbors, they would see and they would notice that there's something different about us and that we would know that that difference is you. So God, would you just continue to help us to be party people and not plank people? And we thank you so much for Jesus. And it's his name we pray. Amen.